What happens when the world's richest man, a visionary who's reshaped industries and redefined what's possible, is brought down to earth by the very system he thought was beneath him? What happens when the titan of tech, Elon Musk, faces a courtroom where the judge doesn't care about his billions or his empire? It all began in a courtroom packed with anticipation, the eyes of the world fixed on one place, the trial of Elon Musk. The atmosphere was thick with tension, not the usual buzz of Silicon Valley's high-stakes deals, but the cold, calculated air of a legal battle that could change everything. A crisp, sterile silence had settled over the room as the judge, a woman of average build but commanding presence, glanced up from her papers. With a slow and deliberate motion, she adjusted her glasses and turned her attention to the man sitting at the defendant's table. Elon Musk, the man who had made history with Tesla, SpaceX, and a string of other revolutionary ventures, now sat there, facing something he'd never expected, a courtroom challenge to his very empire. The judge was no ordinary figure. Her name was Judge Linda Peterson, and she had a reputation for being unflinching and unafraid to call out even the most powerful individuals. While Musk had weathered controversies before, tweets that riled Wall Street, decisions that upset entire industries, this was different. This time, it wasn't a matter of making headlines, this was the law. The trial had begun over a matter that Musk couldn't have foreseen. A legal issue surrounding SpaceX's most recent mission had led to an unexpected lawsuit filed by a coalition of environmental groups. They accused the company of violating environmental regulations, claiming that Musk's ambitions to colonize Mars were causing irreversible damage to Earth's ecosystem. To many, it seemed ludicrous. Who could possibly hold the man responsible for the very future of humanity's survival in space? Yet here he was, with his future at risk, standing in front of a judge who seemed determined to make him face the consequences. "Mr. Musk," Judge Peterson began, her voice sharp and clear, "you stand accused of more than just violating laws. You stand accused of putting the future of this planet in jeopardy, all for the sake of a dream. Tell me, how do you respond to these allegations?" Musk, his usual confident self, sat upright, brushing a strand of dark hair away from his forehead. He was prepared for this. Or so he thought. He had spent decades building his fortune, becoming a name synonymous with innovation. He had faced down regulatory challenges before. He was no stranger to the spotlight and to the weight of criticism. But today, the usual bravado was replaced by an almost imperceptible tension. There was something about this courtroom, about this judge, that made him feel like he was no longer the one in control. With a calm that masked a hint of frustration, Musk stood and adjusted his collar. "Your Honor, I believe this lawsuit is completely without merit," he said, his voice steady. "SpaceX is pushing the boundaries of what's possible, but we're doing so in a way that's both responsible and forward-thinking. The future of humanity depends on us exploring and eventually settling on other planets. The environmental concerns being raised here are misplaced and uninformed. We've followed every regulation, and we're committed to ensuring that our work benefits all of mankind." The room was silent as the judge's gaze never wavered from Musk. She didn't seem impressed by his speech. In fact, her expression remained neutral, as though she had heard it all before. Musk, for all his brilliance, was now at the mercy of a system that didn't care about his status. And something about that was unsettling to him. Judge Peterson flipped through her papers again, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. "Mr. Musk, your vision is grand, but visions don't protect this planet. You may be a genius in the world of technology, but here in this courtroom, you will be held accountable just like any other individual or corporation." The weight of her words seemed to land with a thud in the otherwise silent room. For the first time, Musk felt a flash of vulnerability. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't untouchable. He was just a man, standing trial before a judge who wasn't interested in his billions or his fame. The prosecutor, a sharp and composed woman named Carla Winters, stood to address the court. "Your Honor, we've presented evidence that SpaceX's recent launches have caused severe ecological damage, particularly to the region surrounding their launch sites. This damage goes beyond the immediate environmental impact, it threatens the delicate balance of life on Earth. The question is not just whether SpaceX can continue its operations, but whether we, as a society, can afford to let one man's ambitions put the entire world at risk. The courtroom was silent, all eyes now on Musk. The prosecutor's words echoed in the air, the weight of them sinking in. Musk opened his mouth to respond, but something was different now. His usual quick wit and sharp comebacks seemed to falter as he searched for a response. He wasn't used to being cornered like this, and the frustration was beginning to show. This wasn't a conversation he could simply walk away from. This wasn't a problem he could throw money at or solve with another invention. This was the law, and it didn't care about his fame. A low murmur ran through the courtroom as Musk paused. It was a moment of vulnerability, rare, and perhaps even humbling for a man who had become a symbol of tech-driven success. As he turned to face the judge, something in his eyes shifted. Maybe he hadn't been as prepared for this trial as he thought. Judge Peterson leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Musk, we're not here to debate your personal feelings or your vision for the future. We're here to determine the facts. And so far, your company's actions have failed to meet the legal standards we've set for environmental protection. I suggest you prepare for the next phase of this trial. We will look at the evidence, and we will consider your responses carefully." Musk clenched his jaw, but the weight of the situation was undeniable. This was no longer about his dreams of colonizing Mars. It was about his empire, his legacy, being challenged in a way he had never experienced before. And just like that, Musk realized something profound. In this courtroom, it wasn't his vision or his fortune that mattered. It was the law, and that was something he couldn't control. As the room emptied for a short break, the air felt heavier than before. The sound of heels clicking against the marble floor seemed to echo longer. Musk stood there, motionless for a moment, as the gravity of the situation set in. He wasn't just fighting for his company. He was fighting for his reputation, for his future, and perhaps even for the very ideals he had worked so hard to build. But one question remained: could a man like Elon Musk survive a battle in a courtroom where no amount of money or fame could shield him? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk was never supposed to be like the rest of us. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, he had all the hallmarks of a future legend: ambition, intelligence, and a knack for seeing the world in ways that no one else could. But the road to becoming the billionaire titan of industry we know today wasn't a smooth one. His story wasn't about wealth and ease, it was a tale of overcoming obstacles, confronting skepticism, and pushing forward when everyone told him to stop. Growing up in South Africa, Elon wasn't like the other kids. While his peers were playing soccer or hanging out with friends, young Elon was obsessed with reading. He devoured books, often getting lost in science fiction stories, which spurred his imagination and set the foundation for the vision he would one day bring to life. By the time he was a teenager, he had already taught himself computer programming and sold his first piece of software, a game he called Blaster, a simple space-themed game. For a 12-year-old, this was already something out of the ordinary. But while Musk had a mind for technology, his childhood was not without its struggles. His parents divorced when he was young, and he often felt out of place. His relationship with his father, Elon Musk, was strained, with Elon later describing his father as a terrible human being. This complicated dynamic would later shape his drive and his perception of success. It was perhaps the emotional weight of those early years that created a fierce determination within him, a desire to prove not just to the world, but to himself, that he could achieve greatness. At 17, Elon left South Africa to attend Queen's University in Canada, a decision that was part of his strategy to eventually move to the United States, the land of opportunity. 2 years later, he transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned 2 degrees, one in economics from the Wharton School and the other in physics. It was at Penn where Musk first began to form the ideas that would later shape his career, that technology could be harnessed to make life better for humanity, and that the future was inextricably linked to space. After graduation, Musk turned down multiple job offers from big companies to pursue his own ventures. His first major project, Zip2, was a software company he co-founded with his brother Kimball. The idea behind Zip2 was simple: an online city guide that provided maps, business listings, and news. Musk's vision wasn't to create something small, he envisioned Zip2 becoming a pivotal part of the internet. Eventually, Compaq, later acquired by HP, bought the company for nearly $300 million, and Musk pocketed $22 million from the sale. This was just the beginning of his financial success, but it was more than that. It was the start of his journey as a disruptor, someone willing to challenge the status quo. With his newfound wealth, Musk moved on to his next venture, X.com, an online payment company. X.com quickly evolved into PayPal, which Musk eventually sold to eBay for $1.5 billion in stock. By now, Musk was a rising star in Silicon Valley. He had not only earned a fortune but had also built a reputation as a man who could turn seemingly outlandish ideas into reality. But it was his next move that truly cemented his place in history. In 2002, Musk founded SpaceX with a bold goal: to reduce the cost of space travel and ultimately make it possible for humanity to live on other planets. It seemed like an impossible dream. Launching rockets was an expensive and dangerous business. The government-run space programs had decades of experience, and private companies didn't have the resources to compete. Yet, Musk pressed on. SpaceX initially faced failure after failure. Rockets exploded on launch, and the company was running low on funds. Musk, deeply invested both financially and emotionally, found himself at a crossroads. The pressure to succeed was immense. Investors were starting to question his judgment, and some even thought he was crazy for pursuing a dream as wild as colonizing Mars. But Musk wasn't the type to give up. In 2008, SpaceX launched the Falcon 1 rocket, which succeeded in reaching orbit for the first time. This was a pivotal moment, not just for Musk, but for the entire private space industry. In the following years, SpaceX would go on to develop the Falcon 9, a rocket capable of reusing parts and reducing the cost of space travel, as well as the Dragon spacecraft, which would later be used to send cargo to the International Space Station. Musk's dream was slowly becoming a reality, and in doing so, he had rewritten the rules of space exploration. At the same time, Musk was revolutionizing the automotive industry with Tesla. The electric vehicle company had started out with the Roadster, a luxury electric sports car, and then moved to more practical models like the Model S and Model 3. Tesla, too, faced early setbacks. Critics were skeptical of whether electric cars could ever compete with gasoline-powered vehicles. Yet, Musk's belief in sustainable energy and his commitment to innovation kept Tesla moving forward. But Musk was never just a businessman. He was an idea man, a dreamer. Whether it was his ambitious vision for self-driving cars, his pursuit of artificial intelligence, or his work on the Hyperloop, a high-speed transportation system, Musk was constantly looking for ways to change the world. Yet, despite all of his success, there was a darker side to Musk that few people saw. His temperament was often described as erratic, his tweets often unpredictable and sometimes controversial. He had a way of stirring up controversy, sometimes without meaning to. His public spats with journalists, investors, and even employees became part of his persona. Musk's bravado often overshadowed the man behind the achievements, the person who had faced setbacks, endured personal struggles, and fought for every inch of success. His critics painted him as a man obsessed with his own vision, willing to sacrifice anything and anyone in pursuit of his dreams. Some even wondered if his ambitions had clouded his judgment, pushing him to make decisions that were more about proving himself than about practicality. And now, in this courtroom, Musk's biggest test awaited him. The very thing that had made him great, his refusal to accept limits, his drive to conquer the impossible, was being questioned. His legacy was on the line, and his empire was in jeopardy. But beyond the wealth and the innovations, what was Musk really fighting for? Was it redemption? Was it to prove his critics wrong? Or was it something deeper, something more personal? For the first time, he would have to confront not just the allegations against him, but his own motivations. The story of Elon Musk, the visionary entrepreneur, was about to take a turn. And it would be up to the courtroom to decide whether his dream of changing the world would survive, or whether his legacy would crumble under the weight of his ambitions. The courtroom had already taken on a life of its own, and the tension was palpable. Judge Peterson, though composed, was relentless in her scrutiny, her gaze like a spotlight on Musk as the trial unfolded. The case was now in full swing, and things weren't looking good for the billionaire entrepreneur. Musk sat quietly, occasionally glancing at his legal team, who were whispering furiously among themselves, as if scrambling to find a way out of the mess. For years, Elon Musk had been the architect of his own destiny. His ventures had upended entire industries, his audacity, his vision, and his refusal to accept anything less than extraordinary had become his trademark. Yet, in this room, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the law, and the law was slowly but surely tightening around him. The plaintiffs, a coalition of environmental activists, had brought a fierce case against SpaceX, arguing that the company's rapid expansion had caused irreparable damage to the environment. The lawsuits were as much about Musk's legacy as they were about the specific actions of SpaceX. The courtroom battle wasn't just about a single company or a single violation, it was about whether the world's most ambitious innovator could be held accountable for the consequences of his unchecked dreams. Mr. Musk, Carla Winters, the prosecutor, began again, "We've demonstrated beyond a reasonable doubt that your company has knowingly and repeatedly violated environmental regulations in its pursuit of profits. You've claimed to be a champion of innovation, but it seems that environmental responsibility is a concept you simply don't care about." The accusation was sharp, like a needle piercing Musk's carefully constructed armor. He had been prepared for some tough questioning, but the directness of Winter's attack unsettled him. For all his bravado, Musk wasn't used to being painted as a villain. He was used to being hailed as the savior of the future, the man who would make life on Mars possible. The accusations felt foreign to him. "You're accusing me of negligence, but that couldn't be further from the truth," Musk responded, his voice laced with a thin veneer of control. "SpaceX is committed to sustainable practices. We've invested millions in making sure that our launches do as little harm as possible to the environment. We've gone above and beyond the regulations." "But regulations are the minimum standard, Mr. Musk," interrupted Judge Peterson. Her voice was steady, but the power behind her words cut through the room. "You're not here to boast about exceeding the minimum. You're here to account for what you've done. And what you've done is no small matter. These aren't just minor infractions. This is about long-term, irreversible damage." Musk's face tightened. It was as though the ground beneath him was starting to shift, and he couldn't stop it. For all his achievements, for all the praise he received, this trial threatened to strip away the very thing that had made him who he was, the sense that he could bend the world to his will. "Your Honor, I don't need to be lectured on the importance of the environment," Musk shot back, his calm demeanor starting to crack under the pressure. "SpaceX is pushing the boundaries of what's possible, and yes, that means we're going to face setbacks. But the future is worth the sacrifice. And we will get it right." The words hung in the air, but they weren't enough. Winters had anticipated this argument, and she had an answer ready. She placed a series of documents on the table, each one labeled with a bold red stamp, "Evidence." As she handed them to the judge, she spoke without looking up from the stack. "Let's talk about the cost of that future, Mr. Musk," Winters said, her tone cutting. "Documents obtained from several independent audits and environmental groups show that the damage from your launches, particularly the emissions from your rockets, has been far more harmful than you've admitted. The soot released by your rockets alone has contributed to a measurable increase in atmospheric particulate matter. That particulate matter has been shown to have long-term effects on air quality, as well as on climate change. And we've only just begun to scratch the surface of the problem." The room fell silent. For the first time, Musk was faced with the cold, undeniable truth of the situation. He could no longer rely on his charisma, his vision, or the promise of the future. This was real. And real consequences were now on the table. The silence was broken when Judge Peterson spoke again. Mr. Musk, you've built an empire on the idea of technological progress. But what happens when that progress comes at the expense of the world we live in today? You've had the resources, the opportunity, and the platform to do more. Are you truly ready to face the consequences? Musk's chest tightened. This wasn't a negotiation with investors. This wasn't a tweet that could be erased. This was the law, and there was no way out of it. He could feel his resolve begin to crack. He had spent years being heralded as a hero, and now, he was being cast as the villain in a story that seemed to spiral out of his control. His own words, once full of confidence and hope, now seemed hollow in the face of such stark realities. As the day drew to a close, Musk was left alone with his thoughts, the weight of the accusations sinking in deeper with each passing minute. He had always believed that his work was bigger than any individual, that the grand vision of SpaceX and Tesla would one day save humanity. But the environmental groups, with their relentless accusations, were forcing him to confront a reality he had never fully allowed himself to see. Was he so blinded by the grandeur of his vision that he had failed to see the destruction it caused? In the quiet of the evening, with the courtroom now empty, Musk walked out, his mind racing. The battle had just begun, and he was beginning to understand the magnitude of what lay ahead. This wasn't just a lawsuit. This was a confrontation with his own legacy, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. But what if the damage was already done? What if the hope he had placed in his companies, his innovations, and his vision for the future had blinded him to the very thing he had always claimed to protect, the planet? The days following the courtroom confrontation felt like a blur. Elon Musk couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into a battle he never saw coming. He had faced countless challenges before, failed rocket launches, corporate sabotage, the relentless pressure of being the face of SpaceX and Tesla, but this was different. This was no longer about technology or the future. This was about his very reputation, his legacy. It was late one evening when Musk found himself pacing the halls of his Palo Alto mansion, the grand expanse of the home doing nothing to ease his anxiety. The weight of the case, the evidence against him, and the media frenzy had all come crashing down. His mind raced through the events of the trial, rehashing every word, every moment, as though he could somehow rewrite the narrative in his favor. But the more he thought, the more he realized something terrifying: the stakes had never been higher. The story that had built him into a legend, a self-made billionaire who was reshaping the future, was now being rewritten. There was no more room for error. The trial wasn't just about SpaceX's environmental impact, it was about his own role in shaping a future where his vision was questioned. And for the first time in his life, Elon felt vulnerable. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Kimball, his brother, who had been trying to get in touch with him for days. Kimball was the one person who had always been there for him, a voice of reason when Elon's ambitions threatened to take him too far. He was also one of the few who had the courage to challenge Elon when his drive blinded him. "Elon, I think we need to talk. Come over to the house when you're free. It's important." Elon hesitated, his thumb hovering over the reply button. He knew Kimball wasn't one to ask for a meeting unless something serious was at stake. But what could he say? Everything he had built, everything he had fought for, was at risk. Was he ready to face the truth? In a rare moment of clarity, he decided to go. He needed to speak to someone who wasn't entrenched in the battle, someone who could look at the situation with fresh eyes. After a quick drive through the streets of Silicon Valley, Elon arrived at his brother's place. Kimball greeted him at the door, his expression solemn. Inside, the two men sat in the dimly lit living room, a stark contrast to the futuristic vision Musk was known for. The conversation was difficult, with Kimball asking pointed questions about SpaceX's environmental practices and the lawsuits. Elon, ever the visionary, tried to defend his actions, claiming that the end goal was bigger than the immediate consequences. But Kimball wasn't buying it. "You've been so focused on Mars, Elon," Kimball said, his voice tinged with concern. "You've built all of this, SpaceX, Tesla, because you believed it would save humanity. But what about saving Earth? You can't just ignore what's happening here while you reach for the stars. Elon leaned back, feeling the weight of his brother's words. Kimball's perspective was simple but profound. Elon's dream of space exploration had taken over his vision so completely that he had neglected the world that was right in front of him. The very thing he wanted to protect, Earth, was being harmed by his pursuit of the future. I know what you're saying, Elon admitted, his voice quieter than usual. But we have to push forward. The future of humanity depends on it. And if we don't succeed, everything we're doing right now will be for nothing. Kimball shook his head. You're not going to save humanity if you destroy the planet first. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The conversation had reached a point where nothing more needed to be said. Elon was left with his own thoughts, the self-inflicted pressure building up inside him. He had always prided himself on his ability to make tough decisions, to face challenges head-on and overcome them. But this trial was different. This time, the cost of failure was not just financial, it was the legacy of everything he had worked for. The next morning, Elon returned to the courtroom. His legal team was ready to respond to the allegations, but the air was different now. The evidence that had been presented was undeniable, and Musk's team knew it. They could no longer deny the environmental impact of SpaceX's operations. Now, it was a matter of how much damage had been done, and whether Musk would be held personally responsible. As he took his seat at the defense table, he could feel the eyes of the room on him. Judge Peterson was already seated, her expression unreadable, and the plaintiffs were ready to continue their case. Elon sat back, his mind racing through options. This was the moment that would define everything. This wasn't just about SpaceX, or Tesla, or even his reputation, it was about confronting the very core of what he believed in. Then, Winters, the prosecutor, stood up, her expression determined. She had been methodical in her approach, but now she had the look of someone who knew victory was within reach. Mr. Musk, she began, the evidence is clear. Your company's actions have had a devastating impact on our planet. The question is no longer whether you're guilty, but what happens next. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew this wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a philosophical one. And the fate of the man who had once been hailed as the genius of his generation hung in the balance. Elon Musk had always been a man of the future. But now, he was confronted with the question, could the future he was building justify the damage done in the present? As he sat in that courtroom, the weight of the world seemed to rest on his shoulders. The once unshakable Musk, the man who had revolutionized space travel and electrified the automotive industry, was now facing his own reckoning. What would he choose? Could he prove that his vision for humanity's future could coexist with the planet's survival? Or would the empire he built crumble under the very ideals that had fueled it? The courtroom was heavier today, the air thick with the weight of expectations. The final moments of the trial were upon them. Elon Musk could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the steady churn of anxiety, the realization that his entire future, and the future of his companies, rested on the outcome of the next few hours. His thoughts were scattered, and he could barely focus on the faces in the courtroom as the arguments continued. Judge Peterson had given the floor to the plaintiffs, and they were seizing the opportunity. Carla Winters, the prosecutor, stood tall at the podium, her voice echoing in the tense silence of the room. Mr. Musk, the evidence speaks for itself, Winters said, glancing at a new set of documents she had just presented. What we have shown is not just negligence, it's a pattern of disregard for the most basic principles of environmental responsibility. And while you stand here defending your so-called vision, the truth remains clear, the harm caused by your company's actions is beyond repair. Musk's heart beat faster, each word from Winters punctuating his inner turmoil. He had spent years building SpaceX, Tesla, and his other ventures with the firm belief that they were all part of a greater vision. But standing in this courtroom, hearing the accusations laid out so bluntly, it was impossible to ignore the weight of the environmental impact. The rockets, the emissions, the relentless push to reach Mars at any cost, they were all things he had justified in the name of progress. But now, those very ideals seemed to be his undoing. As winters continued, Musk felt himself withdrawing further into himself. The courtroom felt like a stage, and he was the sole performer, trapped in an act he could not escape from. He had always prided himself on being the innovator, the game-changer who had rewritten the rules of business and technology. But today, those rules were working against him. The world was questioning the very foundation of what he had believed in. But then, something unexpected happened. A small voice within him, something deeper than his desire to win, began to rise. He remembered his original mission. He remembered the reason he had pushed so hard, taken so many risks, and sacrificed so much. He had wanted to save humanity, to give people a better future. SpaceX was never just about rockets, it was about creating the possibility for life beyond Earth. Tesla was more than a car company, it was about shifting the world's dependence on fossil fuels. He had always said that failure was not an option. But now, standing on the precipice of losing everything, he realized something: it wasn't the failure of his companies he feared most. It was the failure of his own ideals, the fear that the world he had worked so hard to create wasn't sustainable. The fear that, for all his ambition, he hadn't accounted for the real costs. Judge Peterson's voice broke through his thoughts, and Musk snapped back to the present. "Mr. Musk," she called. "I believe it's time for your defense." The room fell into a heavy silence. All eyes turned toward him. This was it. The final act. Musk stood up slowly, his movements deliberate, as though he were trying to ground himself in the reality of the moment. He glanced briefly at his legal team, who gave him no reassuring nod, only the resigned look of men who knew the odds. Then, he turned his gaze toward the judge and the jury. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply stood there, looking at the people who would determine his fate. His mind was still whirling, but something about the stillness of the room made him feel an odd sense of calm. It was almost as though, in this moment of uncertainty, the answer he needed had been there all along. Then, he spoke. "Judge Peterson, members of the jury, I've heard everything. And yes, you're right. SpaceX, Tesla, and all the work we've done in the last decade have not been perfect. I'm not here to tell you that we've never made mistakes. But I will tell you this: I never set out to destroy the planet. My goal has always been to find a solution to humanity's most pressing problem, the extinction of life on Earth due to the collapse of our ecosystems." His words were steady now, his voice carrying the weight of his years of work. It wasn't a defense, it was a statement of purpose. "You see, I believe that the future of humanity doesn't lie in staying on Earth forever. It lies in our ability to reach the stars, to become a multiplanetary species. But that future cannot come at the expense of the very planet that sustains us today. I admit we've made mistakes. I admit we've pushed boundaries we shouldn't have. But that is because I still believe, that we can fix it." There was a pause. Musk's eyes briefly swept over the courtroom. He could see that, despite the hard facts laid out by the plaintiffs, something had shifted. The way the jury was looking at him, the way Judge Peterson's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, it was as though they were seeing him not as the arrogant billionaire who had once ignored the consequences of his actions, but as the man who had taken responsibility. "We're not perfect," he continued, "but we are learning. And we will do better. SpaceX will continue to innovate, and Tesla will lead the charge for sustainable energy. But we will do it in a way that balances progress with responsibility. We will build a future where we don't have to choose between the Earth and the stars, we can have both. And that is the vision I will fight for, even if it means I have to rebuild everything." The words hung in the air, and for the first time since the trial began, the courtroom felt silent. Musk could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but also a strange sense of relief. It wasn't just about winning this trial anymore. It was about standing by his principles and taking responsibility for his actions, regardless of the outcome. Judge Peterson nodded slowly, taking in Musk's words before turning to the jury. The final moments of the trial had arrived. Elon Musk stood there, his fate uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that whatever happened next, he would be ready to face it. The trial was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. Elon Musk sat in the back seat of his Tesla, staring out the window as the car cruised through the streets of Palo Alto. It had been days since the verdict had been handed down, but the weight of it still lingered. He hadn't expected the outcome to be as favorable as it was, but he couldn't help feeling that the battle was far from won. Judge Peterson had ruled in his favor, mostly. SpaceX would be forced to implement new, more sustainable practices, and Tesla would be under increased scrutiny for its carbon footprint. But the ruling had also given Musk a second chance, an opportunity to prove that his vision could still reshape the world, without destroying it in the process. The verdict was a small victory in a war that was far from over. It had left him with a stark realization: he had been blinded by his own ambitions, driven so relentlessly toward the stars that he had ignored the very ground beneath his feet. Now, as the media storm began to quiet and the legal team packed up their papers, Elon was left to face the question he had avoided for so long: what was the true cost of his ambition? His thoughts were interrupted when his phone buzzed on the seat beside him. It was Kimball, his brother. A message popped up. "Let's meet. It's time to talk about the future." Elon typed back quickly, agreeing to meet. He hadn't seen Kimball much since the trial, but he knew his brother had been keeping a close eye on everything. Kimball had always been the voice of reason, the one who grounded him when things got too chaotic. If anyone could help him figure out what came next, it was Kimball. Within the hour, Elon pulled up to his brother's house, a simple, modest home on the outskirts of Silicon Valley. Kimball was waiting for him on the porch, his arms crossed, his face the picture of quiet contemplation. When Elon approached, he greeted him with a warm smile. "Elon," Kimball said, clapping him on the back. "You look like you've been through a war." Elon gave a wry smile. "Feels like it, honestly." They sat down on the porch, the cool evening air brushing past them as they watched the sun set behind the distant hills. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar. They had spent countless hours like this, talking about everything from the future of technology to their childhood memories. But today, the conversation felt different. Today, it was about more than just business, it was about the direction of their lives. "So," Kimball began, his tone serious. "What now?" Elon sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I've spent so much time focused on building something big, something that could change the world. But I think I lost sight of what really matters. I've been so focused on Mars, on the future, that I didn't think about the impact I was having here on Earth. And now I'm not sure where to go from here." Kimball nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "You've been trying to save humanity, Elon. But it's like you forgot to save the planet you're standing on." Elon winced. His brother's words hit harder than he expected. It was true. He had been so focused on the long-term vision that he had ignored the immediate problems, the very problems that his companies were supposed to be solving. Climate change, environmental degradation, and the need for sustainable energy were all part of his original vision, but somewhere along the way, he had lost track of those priorities. "You're right," Elon said quietly. "I got caught up in the dream of what could be, and I forgot about what is. I want to fix this. I want to make things right, but I don't know how." Kimball leaned forward, his expression softening. "It's not about fixing everything overnight. You've built these companies from the ground up. You have the resources and the platform to make a difference. But this time, it's about balance. You can't build the future without taking care of the present." Elon nodded slowly, the weight of his brother's words sinking in. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't about abandoning his vision for the future, it was about aligning that vision with the responsibility he had to the world today. He didn't have to choose between Mars and Earth. He could work on both, but he had to find a way to ensure that the future he was building didn't come at the expense of the planet he called home. The conversation shifted then, from grand ambitions to smaller, more practical steps. Kimball suggested that SpaceX could start looking at alternative fuels for its rockets, focusing on cleaner energy sources. Tesla could expand its efforts to make electric vehicles more affordable and accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. There were endless possibilities for how Elon could redirect his efforts, but the key, Kimball emphasized, was a shift in mindset. No longer could Musk afford to view himself as the savior of the future without considering the damage done in the present. As the evening wore on, the two brothers talked long into the night, making plans and bouncing ideas off one another. Elon had never been one to shy away from change, and he could feel that this was a new beginning for him. A beginning that would require a shift in how he approached his work and his life. It would be a challenge, but it was one he was ready to face. The next morning, Elon woke up early, his mind racing with new ideas. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew what he had to do. He had to start small. He had to take the lessons from the trial, from the pain of facing his own flaws, and apply them to the future of his companies. SpaceX would innovate, but it would do so responsibly. Tesla would push forward, but it would do so with a renewed commitment to environmental stewardship. And, most importantly, Elon Musk would no longer see himself as a lone visionary. He would work with others, his team, his family, the world, to create a future that worked for everyone. As he drove to his office that morning, Elon Musk made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for the future to happen. He was going to build it, but this time, with a sense of balance, honoring the present as much as the future. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something greater than he had ever imagined. A week had passed since Elon Musk's moment of reflection, and the buzz around the trial had settled. The media frenzy had cooled, but a deeper, quieter conflict was beginning to brew. It wasn't just about Elon's legal troubles anymore. Now, the real challenge lay in rebuilding trust, with his companies, his investors, his employees, and, most importantly, with the world. Elon sat in his office at Tesla's headquarters, staring at the emails piling up in his inbox. There were messages from environmental groups, press inquiries, government regulators, and, of course, from his investors. Each one seemed to carry the weight of a judgment he had yet to fully face. As much as he wanted to get back to work, focusing on new projects, pushing the boundaries of what his companies could achieve, he knew that he had to address the fallout first. The phone rang, breaking his thoughts. It was Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX. "Elon," Gwynne began, her voice steady but concerned. "We need to talk. There's a lot of uncertainty about how things are going to unfold after the trial. Investors are nervous, and there are questions about whether the sustainability initiatives you're promising are more than just talk." Elon sighed. He had known this conversation was coming. He had always prided himself on his bold vision, but boldness alone wasn't enough to silence the growing skepticism around him. "I understand, Gwynne," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I'm working on a plan to address it. But I can't keep running away from it. I have to face the fact that I've created this mess in the first place. I need to show people that I'm serious about making changes, real changes." There was a long pause before Gwynne spoke again, her voice softer this time. "Elon, you know we've always believed in your vision. But this is bigger than just SpaceX or Tesla. This is about your legacy. And people need to see you taking responsibility, not just for your companies, but for your actions." Elon felt the weight of her words. The trial had been one thing. But now, the real test was how he would lead in the wake of it all. Could he turn the public skepticism into something positive? Could he rebuild the trust that had been shaken? "I'll address it head-on," he said, determination creeping back into his voice. "We'll start with transparency. A full report on our sustainability efforts. We'll bring in third-party audits, open everything up. It's not going to be easy, but it's the right thing to do. If we can't prove we're changing, then we shouldn't be in business." There was a pause on the other end. "Good. That's the kind of leadership we need. Just make sure you're not rushing into it because you feel pressured. This has to be a step-by-step process. Elon nodded even though Gwyn couldn't see him. I won't rush it. But I'll move quickly. As he hung up the phone, Elon leaned back in his chair. This wasn't just about proving the world wrong, it was about proving to himself that he could lead with integrity. The fight in the courtroom had been brutal, but this was a different kind of battle. One that couldn't be won with clever speeches or grandiose promises. It would take time, and it would require a level of transparency he had never allowed himself before. Later that afternoon, Elon convened a meeting with his leadership teams at both SpaceX and Tesla. He had planned the meeting for days, gathering a mix of engineers, executives, and consultants. When everyone was seated, Elon stood before them, addressing the room in a calm but serious tone. I know there's been a lot of uncertainty lately. I know there are questions about our future, about how we're going to fix the issues we've created. But here's the truth, we have an opportunity. We can turn this into something greater than what we've built already. He paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. We've always prided ourselves on innovation, on pushing boundaries. But now, we need to show the world that we can push boundaries responsibly. That means changing our approach to sustainability, not as a side project, but as the core of everything we do. It starts with transparency and accountability. A murmur ran through the room, and Elon could feel the weight of the skepticism lingering in the air. These were the people who had worked tirelessly for years to build what Tesla and SpaceX had become. They had seen the highs, but they had also seen the challenges. The expectations had shifted, and the tension was palpable. We'll bring in third-party audits to validate our efforts, Elon continued. We'll release detailed reports on our environmental impact, on our carbon footprint, and we'll make sure every new project we undertake has sustainability at its core. If we fail, we own it. But if we succeed, we lead the world into a new era. He could see the doubt in some faces, but also a flicker of hope. They knew this was a pivotal moment, a moment that could define the future of their companies. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be resistance. But they were used to overcoming the impossible. Elon could feel it, the same spirit that had driven SpaceX to land rockets back on Earth and Tesla to change the auto industry was still alive in this room. We're in this together, Elon said, his voice firm. And we're going to rebuild, but this time, we'll do it right. The meeting wrapped up, and as the leaders of SpaceX and Tesla filed out, Elon stayed behind for a moment, staring at the empty room. For the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of responsibility, not just as a businessman, but as a leader. He had taken risks before, he had pushed his companies to the brink more than once. But now, the stakes were higher. This time, it wasn't just about the future of technology. It was about his legacy. As he sat there, the door to his office creaked open. Kimball stepped in, his presence as grounding as ever. You've got the right idea, Kimball said with a grin. But don't forget to take it one step at a time. This isn't going to be fixed overnight. Elon smiled faintly. Yeah, I know. But I've always believed in doing things that seem impossible. And this feels like the most important mission I've ever taken on. Kimball nodded, his gaze softening. Well, if anyone can make the impossible happen, it's you. But remember, it's not about how fast you go. It's about making sure you're headed in the right direction. Elon stood up, his resolve solidifying. Right direction. That's what I'm focused on now. And with that, the real journey began. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure on Elon Musk only grew stronger. The world was watching him closely, waiting for evidence that he could follow through on his promises of sustainability and responsibility. Every decision he made was now under intense scrutiny. The media, environmental activists, investors, and even his employees were all looking for signs of whether Elon Musk could truly change his approach, or if he was just a man desperate to save face after a bitter trial. Elon spent countless hours in meetings with his leadership teams, strategizing and formulating plans for how to integrate sustainability across all of his companies. He had tasked the engineers at SpaceX to come up with new rocket technologies that would be more environmentally friendly. At Tesla, the focus was on making electric vehicles more accessible and creating a more efficient battery system that would power homes and businesses in a way that didn't deplete natural resources. But with each new idea, each new initiative, the weight of the world's expectations felt heavier. Elon had always thrived under pressure, but this time was different. This wasn't about launching a rocket or designing a car. This time, it was about something much bigger, the future of the planet, and the legacy of the companies he had built. He couldn't afford to fail. One evening, after another long day at Tesla's headquarters, Elon found himself walking through the quiet, empty parking lot of the company's main office. His thoughts were consumed by everything he had promised to do, everything he had to do. He hadn't realized how deeply the stress had begun to affect him until he felt his hands trembling, gripping the cold metal of his car. He stood there for a moment, his mind racing. How could he possibly keep up with all of the demands placed on him? How could he balance the relentless pace of innovation with the overwhelming responsibility of leading both SpaceX and Tesla through this transition? Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was Gwynne Shotwell. "Elon," she said, her tone clipped, as if she was trying to keep her own frustration in check. "We have a problem. The environmental groups are starting to question our sincerity. They're accusing us of greenwashing, promising more than we can deliver." Elon ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. "Greenwashing? They don't know what we've been working on. We're serious about this." "I know, but the optics are terrible," Gwynne replied. "They see all the shiny new products, but they're not seeing the changes happening behind the scenes. We need to show them we're doing more than just talking." Elon exhaled sharply. "How do we do that?" "We need to release detailed, actionable plans. And I'm talking about specifics. Not just lofty goals, but real, measurable steps. We have to prove we're committed, not just to the environment, but to the people who rely on us." Elon thought for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. They needed to demonstrate their progress, not just promise it. He had always been known for thinking big, for reaching beyond what seemed possible. But now, more than ever, he needed to show that his vision wasn't just a dream, it was something tangible. "I'll call a meeting first thing in the morning," he said finally. "We're going to develop a roadmap, one that's transparent and achievable. We're not going to leave room for doubt anymore." "Good," Gwynne said, sounding more relieved. "We'll be here to help, but you need to get ahead of this before it spirals." As the call ended, Elon stood there in the parking lot, staring up at the stars. He had always believed in the power of the future, in humanity's ability to push the boundaries of what was possible. But now, in this moment of crisis, he realized that his vision wasn't just about the future, it was about fixing the present. And to do that, he would have to be more vulnerable than ever before. The next morning, Elon gathered his leadership teams once again, this time with an added sense of urgency. As they filed into the conference room, Elon could see the weariness in their eyes. Everyone was stretched thin, but the weight of what they were about to face was undeniable. This wasn't just another meeting, it was a turning point. "We're at a crossroads," Elon began, his voice steady but resolute. "I've been so focused on the future, on Mars, on pushing the boundaries of technology. But I've neglected the present. I've neglected our responsibility to the planet we're standing on. Now, we have a chance to make things right. We need a clear, actionable roadmap that shows the world we're serious." He paced back and forth, feeling the tension in the room build. "It's not enough to promise change. We need to show it. We'll need to focus on our carbon footprint, our waste management, our energy consumption. We'll need to make our data public, show people what we're doing to reduce our impact. And we need to get ahead of the criticisms. If we don't, we'll lose everything." For the next few hours, the room buzzed with ideas. The team worked tirelessly, sketching out plans to reduce the carbon footprint of SpaceX's launches and to make Tesla's supply chain more transparent. They discussed creating a sustainable supply chain for battery production, one that didn't rely on harmful practices like mining for lithium and cobalt. The team was united in their efforts, but the reality of how much work lay ahead was daunting. Elon's mind was a whirlwind of ideas, but as the day wore on, he could feel the weight of the pressure starting to press down on him once again. He had always been willing to take risks, to throw himself into the unknown. But now, he wasn't just risking his companies, he was risking the future of the planet. And that thought gnawed at him. Later that evening, as he walked back to his car, he received a call from Kimball. "Elon, I've been thinking," Kimball said, his voice a little more light-hearted than usual. "You've been running yourself ragged. It's time to step back for a bit. Get some air. Recharge. You won't be able to fix everything if you're running on empty." Elon paused, feeling the familiar weight of guilt press down on him. "I can't afford to take a break right now. There's too much at stake." Kimball chuckled softly. "I know. But you've always been someone who rises to the occasion. Just don't forget that you're human. Even the greatest visionaries need a moment to breathe." Elon smiled faintly, appreciating his brother's concern. Maybe Kimball was right. Maybe he needed to take a step back, just for a moment. After all, the world wasn't going anywhere. But his health and clarity of mind, those were things he couldn't afford to lose. As he drove home, he made a mental note. Tomorrow would be another day to face the rising conflict, to keep pushing forward. But tonight, for the first time in a while, he would allow himself to take a breath. The world had been watching Elon Musk closely, waiting for him to take the next big step in his journey of redemption. The sustainability roadmap had been released with much fanfare, the press conferences were held, and a sense of cautious optimism had begun to circulate. Investors were tentatively supportive, and the public was curious, but still skeptical. For the first time in a long while, Elon was feeling like things might actually be turning around. The pressure, while still ever present, was beginning to feel manageable again. But then, a bombshell hit. It came in the form of a leaked internal report, a document that had been meant for the board of directors but somehow found its way into the hands of environmental groups and the media. The report, while showcasing impressive progress in some areas, highlighted significant gaps in Tesla's sustainability goals. There were inconsistencies in energy consumption and troubling details about the supply chain for lithium-ion batteries. Most damning of all, it suggested that while Tesla had made efforts to reduce its environmental impact, there were still major challenges ahead, challenges that Elon had promised to tackle head-on. The headlines were brutal. Tesla's sustainability plans exposed as incomplete, Musk's vision falls short. Elon Musk's green revolution faces reality check. Tesla's greenwashing crisis deepens amid internal leaks. As soon as Elon saw the news, a cold wave of dread washed over him. His phone was blowing up with notifications. Calls from journalists, from investors, and from his leadership team, all coming in at once. But the most painful blow came from within his own company. A small but vocal group of employees took to social media, accusing the company of not living up to the promises made by its CEO. They were upset, not just with the content of the report, but with Elon himself for not addressing the internal problems sooner. Elon sat at his desk, staring at the screen as the flood of messages continued. His heart raced, and a knot formed in his stomach. This was the setback he had feared, the moment where everything could unravel. His initial instinct was to fight back, to discredit the leak, to accuse the press of twisting the narrative. But deep down, he knew the truth. The report hadn't been a fabrication. It was a snapshot of the reality that had been building for months. He had been so focused on his grand vision for the future that he had overlooked the small, yet vital, details that made the difference between success and failure. He needed to act fast, before the damage became irreparable. Within an hour, he called an emergency meeting with his leadership team. As the room filled with his top executives, he could feel the weight of their gazes upon him. No one spoke as they took their seats, the silence stretching between them. Elon's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, trying to figure out how to spin this in a way that wouldn't ruin everything they had worked for. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was firm but betraying a hint of the frustration he was feeling. I know this leak is a problem. And I know it looks bad. But let's be clear, we're not backing down. We've made mistakes, but we're still on track to change the world. The question is, how do we show everyone that we're still committed to our vision of a sustainable future? Gwynne Shotwell was the first to speak. Elon, we can't ignore this. We need to acknowledge the gaps in our sustainability efforts. We need to be upfront about what we're doing wrong and show the world that we are taking concrete steps to fix it. If we don't, this will only get worse. Elon nodded slowly, his mind whirling. Gwynne was right. Denial wasn't the answer. Transparency was his only option, but it felt like admitting failure, a feeling Elon hated more than anything. We need to double down on transparency, Elon said, his voice gaining strength as he went on. We'll release an updated, more detailed sustainability report. This time, we'll include our shortcomings. We'll include the hard truths. We'll put everything out there for everyone to see. But we'll also outline the steps we're taking to fix it. The room was still, but Elon could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. He knew this was the moment. This was the tipping point. The world would either see him as a visionary who had stumbled and was now facing the reality of his actions, or they would see him as a failure who had promised the impossible and couldn't deliver. Gwynne leaned forward, concern in her eyes. Elon, you know this will be a tough pill to swallow. We've built an empire on bold promises, and now we're saying that some of those promises weren't fully met. How do you think the public will react? I think they'll respect us more if we're honest, Elon said, though doubt lingered in his voice. They might be disappointed, but they'll see that we're not hiding from the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that will restore some of the trust we've lost. The team went to work, preparing the new report and devising a strategy for communicating with the media and the public. But as the hours wore on, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that this was a defining moment in his career. The emotional toll of everything, the trial, the pressure to deliver on his promises, the weight of the responsibility he had taken on, was starting to feel unbearable. Later that night, after a long day of meetings and strategy sessions, Elon sat alone in his office, staring out the window at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, but they felt far away, like the world he had once dominated was now slipping from his grasp. Just then, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Kimball, take a moment. You can't fix everything in one day. Give yourself a break. Elon chuckled bitterly, knowing that his brother was right. But how could he relax when everything was falling apart? He responded with a single line, I'll fix it. But I'm not sure what's left after that. As the night stretched on, Elon sat with his thoughts, trying to quiet the storm in his mind. For the first time in a long while, he didn't have all the answers. And that scared him more than anything. The following days were a blur of meetings, press conferences, and tense phone calls. The leaked report had caused a storm of criticism, but as Elon Musk had anticipated, his decision to embrace transparency began to shift the narrative. The updated sustainability report went live, and though the backlash was sharp at first, there was an undeniable sense of respect for Elon's willingness to admit mistakes. It wasn't the typical corporate response, no flashy PR spin, no deflections, just a raw and honest look at where they were, and where they needed to go. Elon had spent hours in the media, answering questions with a rare vulnerability. There was no denying the challenges Tesla and SpaceX faced, but Elon's message was clear, this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Every venture worth pursuing comes with its failures. The key is not in avoiding mistakes, but in how you handle them when they happen. We're not perfect, but we are committed to making things right. And that's what matters, Elon said in one of the many interviews. It wasn't an easy sell. But as the days went by, the public seemed to begin accepting the reality of Elon's situation. They saw the genuine determination behind his words, the promise of a future that was grounded in progress and honesty. It was a step back, sure, but it was also a step forward. And that was enough. Inside Tesla and SpaceX, the atmosphere was markedly different. Employees who had once been disillusioned with the lack of progress now saw their CEO as someone who was, for the first time, truly listening. They were tired, no doubt, but there was a renewed sense of purpose. One morning, Elon sat with his core team in a quiet meeting room. The energy in the room was palpable, different from the tense, chaotic sessions they'd had weeks ago. There was a sense of optimism again, the kind of optimism that can only come after confronting the hard truth. "We're not where we want to be," Elon began, his voice steady. "But we're getting closer. And that matters more than any milestone we've hit so far. What we've built here is bigger than any individual mistake or setback. It's about creating something that lasts. Something that changes the world. And I still believe we can do that." There was a long pause, but then Gwynne Shotwell, who had been one of the staunchest voices for transparency, spoke up. "You've done more in the past few weeks than most leaders do in a lifetime. You've shown the world that failure isn't the end, it's an opportunity to evolve." Elon nodded slowly. The weight of her words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't about succeeding at all costs. It was about perseverance in the face of adversity. It was about learning and adapting, especially when the stakes were high. The team rallied behind him, setting more concrete goals. They focused on sustainability in ways they hadn't before, streamlining their supply chains, investing in cleaner materials, and innovating new ways to recycle their products. The efforts that had once been scattered and vague were now being organized into a unified, actionable plan. Elon knew it wouldn't be easy. In fact, he knew there would be more setbacks along the way. But there was something different now. The weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. His clarity had returned, and he wasn't alone in the fight anymore. For the first time, his vision felt like a shared goal, not just his, but the company's, the team's, and the world's. Weeks passed, and the public's perception began to shift once more. A shift that surprised even Elon. People who had once seen him as an egotistical visionary, too focused on his own ambitions, now began to view him as something more, someone who was willing to take responsibility, own up to mistakes, and work toward a better future. It wasn't just the press conferences or the reports that made a difference. It was the tangible changes happening behind the scenes. Tesla unveiled a new partnership with renewable energy companies to integrate their solar products with sustainable battery storage solutions. SpaceX revealed their plan to offset their carbon footprint through initiatives aimed at improving rocket fuel and reducing emissions. These were the things that mattered, the things that would lead to real change. But the most significant change wasn't external. It was internal. Elon had learned something important in the aftermath of the trial, the leaks, and the mounting pressure: humility. The ability to acknowledge that he didn't have all the answers. The willingness to admit that, despite his best intentions, he hadn't been perfect. And in that humility, he had found strength. It wasn't just about solving problems, it was about evolving as a leader, growing alongside his companies, and allowing his vision to be shaped by the needs of the world, not just his own ambitions. As he sat in his office one evening, looking out at the horizon, Elon felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not because the world had stopped challenging him, or because everything had fallen into place. But because he knew he had done everything he could to make things right. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was no longer a road he had to walk alone. He picked up his phone and texted Kimball, "You were right. I needed to take a step back. Now, I feel like I can move forward." Within seconds, Kimball replied, "Told you. Keep going, bro. You've got this." Elon smiled to himself. For all the struggles, for all the setbacks, this was the moment of clarity he had needed. And as he prepared for the next phase of his journey, he realized something that had always been true but never more apparent than now: the future wasn't written yet. But every step, every decision, every setback and triumph would shape it. And no matter what, he would keep pushing forward. What does it mean to fail and rise again? How do we learn from our mistakes and continue to chase our vision? Leave a comment and let us know how you stay motivated through your toughest moments. And don't forget to subscribe for more updates. This journey is just beginning. Elon had weathered the storm, but as always, the world kept turning, and the pressures of the future loomed just as large. He was no stranger to the idea of pushing forward in the face of uncertainty, but there was something uniquely terrifying about being on the precipice of what could be the greatest challenge of his life. The pressure from investors, environmental groups, and even his own leadership team was mounting. Everyone wanted results, and they wanted them now. It had been 6 months since the leaked report, and despite the small victories and the turnaround in public opinion, a sense of unease still lingered in Elon's gut. The sustainability projects were progressing, but slowly. Rivals in the electric vehicle market were pushing forward with their own green initiatives, threatening to overshadow Tesla's once dominant position. And SpaceX, despite its remarkable achievements, was facing the consequences of its own environmental impact. The media had moved on to other stories, but the pressure hadn't let up. Elon knew that the only way forward was not just to meet the promises he'd made, but to exceed them. And so, once again, Elon set out on a journey that would push him beyond his limits. One evening, in the late hours of the night, Elon sat in his office, looking at the latest reports on SpaceX's Mars mission. The goal had always been to make humanity a multiplanetary species. But now, after the setbacks, the environmental scandals, and the mounting public pressure, the weight of that mission felt heavier than ever. He had never been someone who easily backed down, but lately, he was questioning whether he had the right to keep pushing forward. Was he simply a man driven by ego, or was he truly working towards something greater? Was he just trying to save his own legacy, or was he genuinely trying to change the world? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Come in," Elon said, his voice softer than he had intended. Gwynne Shotwell entered, her expression serious. She had been with him from the start, through all the highs and lows, and there was a bond between them that went beyond business. She had seen him at his most determined and at his most vulnerable. "Elon, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. Elon gestured to the seat across from him. "About what?" Gwynne sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "About the future. About SpaceX. We've made incredible progress, but there's no denying the environmental issues surrounding our operations. And we're not just talking about the public perception anymore, we're talking about the real environmental impact of what we do. We need to rethink some of our approaches if we want to stay ahead of the curve and remain the leader we claim to be." Elon ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I know. I've been thinking about it a lot too. But if we slow down now, we risk losing everything. We can't afford to take our foot off the gas. Not when the world needs us to keep pushing forward." Gwynne leaned forward. "I'm not saying slow down. I'm saying we need to be smarter. More strategic. We have the technology to make SpaceX sustainable, but we're not using it to its full potential. There are ways to innovate in space travel and reduce our environmental footprint, if we put our minds to it." Elon sat in silence for a moment, processing her words. He had always prided himself on being a pioneer, on taking risks that no one else would. But perhaps the time had come to be a different kind of leader. Not just a risk-taker, but a thinker, a visionary who could see beyond the immediate challenges and work towards solutions that would make a lasting impact. "Okay," Elon said, finally breaking the silence. "Let's do it. Let's make SpaceX the leader in sustainable space travel. I'll direct the team to begin exploring new materials, new fuel sources. We'll start from scratch if we have to. We'll lead the way." Gwynne smiled. "That's what I like to hear. Let's make it happen." Over the next few weeks, Elon dove headfirst into the project. He spent countless hours in meetings with scientists, engineers, and environmental experts, working to find innovative solutions to SpaceX's environmental challenges. It wasn't easy. The technology was complex, and the barriers were high. But Elon was determined. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't focused on how fast he could move forward, he was focused on how sustainable that progress could be. It was a painstaking process. Every new solution seemed to come with its own set of problems. New fuel sources proved to be more expensive than anticipated. Renewable energy technology for the rockets faced limitations in space conditions. But Elon refused to back down. He pushed his team harder than ever, inspiring them with his unwavering belief that they could find a way to make it work. And slowly, progress began to materialize. New innovations were developed that would allow SpaceX to significantly reduce its carbon footprint, including a more sustainable rocket design and more eco-friendly fuel options. The breakthroughs weren't monumental, but they were steps in the right direction. Meanwhile, Tesla's commitment to sustainability continued to grow. Their new solar products were starting to gain traction in the marketplace, and the electric vehicle industry was beginning to shift toward more environmentally conscious approaches. Elon had always been a believer in technology's ability to solve the world's most pressing issues, but now, he was seeing the results of his efforts in real time. As SpaceX announced their new, more sustainable mission designs, and Tesla continued to push the envelope with clean energy solutions, Elon realized something that had eluded him for a long time: sustainability wasn't just a business strategy. It was a philosophy. A way of life. It was about recognizing that progress and responsibility had to go hand in hand. That in order to build the future, you had to take care of the planet that made it all possible. In that moment of reflection, as the weight of the challenges began to lift, Elon realized that he wasn't just changing the world with his companies. He was changing himself. It was a humbling thought, but a powerful one. He had always thought that the future was something to conquer, to master. But now, he saw it as something to nurture, a future where sustainability wasn't just an option, but a necessity. With newfound clarity, Elon knew that the work was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But this time, he was ready. He had the strength to face whatever came his way, and more importantly, he knew that he didn't have to do it alone. The journey was far from finished. But at last, Elon Musk felt ready to lead his companies, and the world, into a new era. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. But as Elon Musk sat in his office overlooking the bustling Tesla factory in Fremont, California, he felt a shift. The clarity from the breakthroughs at SpaceX and Tesla had ignited something in him. He wasn't just leading companies anymore, he was leading a revolution. It was a revolution of ideas, of sustainability, and of innovation. But the world wasn't ready to let him rest. The media continued to chase stories of environmental concerns, questioning whether his companies were doing enough. Tesla's Model 3 and Model Y were flying off the production lines, but every new success only brought more scrutiny. Journalists, environmentalists, and competitors all had their eyes on him, waiting for the next slip-up, the next challenge. And for Elon, that kind of pressure was a daily reality. Why does it feel like no matter how much we do, it's never enough? Elon had said aloud one night to Gwyn, frustration lacing his voice as he sat across from her in the conference room. We keep pushing, innovating, changing, and it feels like people just don't understand the scale of what we're trying to accomplish. Gwyn, ever the pragmatist, leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Because people don't always understand vision. They don't see the future you're building. They only see the now, the immediate results. They don't see the long road ahead. Elon sighed, rubbing his face. He had always been a long-term thinker, but it was starting to feel like the weight of the immediate demands was starting to drown out the voice of his vision. We're still just at the tip of the iceberg, Gwyn. I feel like we're about to hit a tipping point, he said, his voice growing more intense. And what happens when we reach it? Gwyn asked carefully, her eyes searching his face. Elon paused, the enormity of the moment sinking in. We either break through to something greater, or we crash. There's no in-between. But I'm not giving up. Not now. Not when we're this close. Gwyn gave him a small smile. That's why you're Elon Musk. It wasn't just the challenges within his companies that kept him awake at night, it was the broader implications of what they were all working toward. He wasn't just trying to make electric cars the norm or put people on Mars, he was trying to build a future where humanity could thrive without destroying the planet. But that mission came with consequences. There would be those who would resist, those who would question his methods, and those who would say the vision was impossible. And yet, the stakes had never felt higher. Tesla's success was undeniable. With the Model S, Model X, Model 3, and Model Y now being produced at scale, the company had cemented itself as the leader in the electric vehicle industry. But that success had also led to a growing demand for transparency. Investors wanted proof that the sustainable vision Elon had promoted was real, not just in terms of the products, but in terms of the process. The world needed to see that Tesla was walking the walk, not just talking the talk. In that moment, Elon knew the answer lay in the next step, transparency. Not just in their marketing materials or their quarterly reports, but in how they operated at every level. He needed to show the world that Tesla, and SpaceX, were truly committed to the future they claimed to want to build. He wasn't sure how it would look yet, but it was time to take a leap of faith. They would go beyond what anyone expected. It wasn't just about reducing emissions, it was about ensuring that everything they did, from production to supply chains, was as sustainable as possible. We need to build the foundation for the next stage, Elon said, his eyes gleaming with determination. And we need to do it right. No more shortcuts. We have to push ourselves harder, and do what others think is impossible. Are we ready for that kind of commitment? Gwyn asked. There was a hint of concern in her voice. Because this isn't just about changing a product line or creating new technology. This is about revolutionizing how we operate. We're talking about redefining what it means to be a sustainable company. I'm ready. We're ready, Elon said, the confidence in his voice palpable. We've already changed the game in so many ways. Now we need to finish what we started. Over the following weeks, Elon's focus was razor-sharp. He pushed Tesla and SpaceX to develop new strategies, new approaches, and new technologies that would make them the standard-bearers of sustainability. Every department was scrutinized, every process examined. The results were gradual, but they were there. Tesla began investing in more sustainable materials, exploring alternatives to lithium-ion batteries, and working with global suppliers to ensure that their sourcing and manufacturing processes didn't contribute to environmental harm. SpaceX launched an initiative to reduce its rocket fuel emissions, and they were researching reusable components for its Mars missions that would be more efficient and eco-friendly. For Elon, this was a turning point. Not only was he pushing the limits of technology, but he was now focusing on pushing the limits of responsibility. It wasn't enough to just be the most innovative. Now, they had to be the most ethical, the most sustainable. The news outlets soon began to report on Tesla's new sustainability goals, praising the company for its commitment to transparency. The public, who had once doubted Elon's sincerity, was now watching closely. They saw the commitment in his actions, not just his words. But the world was still skeptical. The road to a sustainable future was long, and no one knew better than Elon how easily things could fall apart. And while the future seemed to be moving in the right direction, he knew that every step forward would be met with opposition. There were always those who would question, always those who would doubt. It was the price of leadership. As Elon sat back and watched the early results of their new sustainability initiatives, he realized that they were at a precipice, a tipping point, as he had put it. The decisions they made in these critical moments would determine whether their future was one of innovation and progress, or failure. And for the first time, Elon was okay with the uncertainty. Because he knew that no matter what happened, he had given everything he had to make it work. The tipping point wasn't just about Tesla or SpaceX. It was about him, about the legacy he would leave. But more than that, it was about the future of humanity. And Elon Musk wasn't about to let the future slip through his fingers. The buzz surrounding Tesla's new sustainability initiatives continued to grow, but not all of it was positive. As Elon Musk sat in a high-stakes meeting with his core leadership team at Tesla's headquarters, he could sense the rising tension in the room. The media had largely praised the company's commitment to transparency and environmental sustainability, but behind the scenes, things were beginning to shift. Gwynne Shotwell was the first to break the silence. "Elon, there's something we need to address. There are some things happening that we can't ignore. Investors are starting to get nervous about the pace of these changes." Elon's gaze darkened as he leaned back in his chair. "Nervous about what exactly?" "They're nervous about the long-term impact of these changes," Gwynne replied, her tone steady. "They're not sure if we can keep up the momentum, especially when it comes to the costs of this transition. And there are whispers about us being too focused on greenwashing the public instead of delivering actual results." "Greenwashing?" Elon repeated, his voice laced with incredulity. "That's not what we're doing at all. We're trying to create real change." "I know that, Elon." "You know that," Gwynne said, her eyes meeting his. "But not everyone sees it that way. Some of our investors are questioning whether we're actually making a tangible impact. They want to see numbers, projections, and most importantly, profits." Elon stood up, pacing the room. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "This is exactly what I've been afraid of. People want the immediate results, not the long-term vision. But they're not seeing the bigger picture. We need to build a future where electric cars aren't just a luxury but a necessity. But I can't do that if I'm constantly battling the clock." Gwynne's eyes softened. "I know. But there's another issue we need to consider. While we're doubling down on sustainability, our competitors are getting more aggressive. They're catching up. Ford, GM, even Rivian, they're pushing their electric vehicles harder and faster, and they're targeting Tesla's market share." Elon clenched his jaw. He knew it was coming, but hearing it laid out so plainly still stung. "We can't afford to slow down. We're leading this market. If we fall behind now, we might not get another chance." "We're not falling behind," Gwynne reassured him. "But we need to keep moving fast and stay ahead of the competition. If we're going to survive this race, we have to do something they can't replicate." Elon stopped pacing and looked out the window, his thoughts racing. The pressure was mounting. Tesla had always been more than just a company to him, it was his lifeline, his legacy. But now, even the things he was most proud of, like his commitment to sustainability, were coming under attack. It wasn't just the competitors that worried him, it was the unseen enemy that had always lurked in the background, the ever-looming doubt that he could actually pull this off. Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a news alert. He tapped on the screen, reading the headline. "Tesla's sustainability push, greenwashing or genuine change?" The article quoted industry analysts and environmental advocates, many of whom praised the company's efforts but questioned the true scale of its impact. A few prominent voices even accused Tesla of using environmentalism as a marketing ploy, without truly committing to the kind of deep changes that the world needed. Elon's blood ran cold as he read the words. Greenwashing. The one thing he had spent years trying to avoid was now being hurled at him. The very people who had once celebrated his ambition now questioned his integrity. "This is not good," Elon muttered, his fingers gripping the edges of the desk. "We've been transparent. We've been working harder than anyone to make this happen. And now they're calling it a scam?" Gwynne nodded. "The world is watching us, Elon. And right now, some of them are questioning our intentions. We need to find a way to prove that we're not just paying lip service to sustainability, that we're walking the walk." "We will," Elon said, his voice cold and determined. "But it's not just about proving them wrong. We need to show them that we can lead this movement in a way no one else can." This isn't just about electric cars anymore. This is about changing the way the world thinks about energy, about transportation, and about the future. The room fell silent, each person deep in thought. Elon knew that the next few months would be critical. He couldn't afford to allow the narrative to shift. He had to take control, not just of Tesla's future but of the public perception as well. It was time for bold action. But there was something even more pressing on Elon's mind. The backlash against Tesla's sustainability efforts wasn't just a challenge, it was a threat. And if he didn't act swiftly, the damage could be irreversible. The world could turn against him, against the vision he had so carefully crafted. The dream of a sustainable future was in jeopardy. That night, after the meeting, Elon couldn't sleep. His mind buzzed with thoughts, his fingers itching to make the next move. But the pressure was building. The competition, the public scrutiny, the growing sense of doubt, it all weighed heavily on him. He knew that he had faced greater challenges before. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't just about a new product launch or a quarterly earnings report. This was about the future of humanity, and the mission he had spent his life working toward. He needed a plan. A plan that would not only silence the critics but set a new standard for the entire industry. As the hours dragged on, Elon finally sat down at his desk and began to sketch out his vision. He had always been a man of audacious goals. But now, more than ever, he needed to think even bigger. The world needed proof, not just that Tesla was changing the game, but that this new world he had dreamed of was possible. And he would show them. But first, he needed to confront the unseen enemy head-on. The air was thick with tension as Elon Musk prepared for his next big move. The stakes had never been higher, and he knew that Tesla's future, along with the future of his broader vision, depended on what happened next. He couldn't afford to be cautious anymore, the time for small steps had passed. The only way forward was to make a bold declaration, to take the fight directly to the very critics who had begun to question everything he stood for. Gwyn was already in the conference room when Elon arrived, looking over the latest projections. The news had only gotten worse over the past week. The stock had taken a hit, and the media was relentless, doubting not only Tesla's sustainability efforts but the company's long-term survival. Rivian and other competitors were now pushing electric vehicles with aggressive advertising campaigns, trying to capture the spotlight Tesla had so long dominated. The world was moving fast, and Elon felt as if he was standing still, watching the pieces slip away. "Elon," Gwyn said, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of concern. "The board wants to meet with you again. They're worried about the numbers. They don't see the return on investment they were hoping for, and with all this negative press, they're wondering if we can still pull this off." Elon's eyes narrowed. The weight of it all had been building, and now it felt as if the world was closing in on him. "Tell them we're not just about numbers. We're about changing the entire world. But if they're only looking at the short-term profits, they're going to miss everything we're doing. I won't back down on this. We can't afford to alienate them either, Elon," Gwyn replied carefully. "The board is full of investors who need assurances that we're making real progress. Not just in technology, but in the market. They need something tangible to believe in." Elon thought for a moment, his mind racing through the possibilities. The pressure from investors, the scrutiny from the media, it was all mounting. But there was one thing that Elon had always believed in: when everything seemed to be falling apart, it was time to go bigger. Much bigger. "If they want something tangible," Elon said, finally coming to a decision, "then we'll give them something they can't ignore." Gwyn raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time for a public statement," Elon said, his eyes burning with determination. "We're going to showcase exactly what we're doing and why it's working. We're going to put everything on the line. I'm not going to let these critics define us, Gwyn. It's time we showed the world what we're really capable of." The next morning, Elon stood in front of a room full of journalists, investors, and stakeholders at a high-profile press conference. The room buzzed with excitement and curiosity. The stakes were high, and everyone in the room knew it. As he stepped up to the podium, Elon looked around the room, scanning the faces of the journalists, many of whom had written scathing articles about Tesla's sustainability efforts. There were skeptical investors in the crowd, arms crossed, waiting for him to make a mistake. And then, there were his loyal fans, who believed in the vision even when the world didn't. "Good morning," Elon began, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "I know there has been a lot of talk recently about Tesla's commitment to sustainability and our long-term future. There's been criticism, skepticism, and doubt. And to that, I say, bring it on." A murmur rippled through the room. Elon paused, allowing his words to sink in. "We're not just making electric cars," he continued. "We're changing the way the world thinks about energy, transportation, and the environment. We've had some setbacks, sure. But we've also had incredible victories. Our solar energy division is growing rapidly. Our batteries are setting new industry standards. And we are pushing the boundaries of what's possible. But we're not stopping here." He took a deep breath. This was the moment. The tipping point. We're doubling down. We're going to show the world what real sustainability looks like. No more half measures. We're going to innovate faster, smarter, and more efficiently than anyone else. We're going to take the risks that others won't, and we're going to change the game. And most importantly, we're going to do it while making sure we leave a better planet for future generations. The room was silent as Elon's words hung in the air. Then, he turned to the large screen behind him and clicked a button. A video began to play, an ambitious, sweeping montage of Tesla's operations, from the assembly lines in California to the solar farms in Nevada, to the gigafactories being constructed in Europe and China. The video showcased Tesla's electric vehicles, their solar-powered homes, the vast network of charging stations, and the SpaceX missions designed to make humanity a multiplanetary species. Every image was a statement. A declaration that Tesla wasn't just a car company. It was the foundation for the future. As the video ended, Elon stood there, letting the silence fill the room. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on him. But instead of feeling the pressure, he felt something else, resolve. "We've already achieved more than anyone thought possible," he said, his voice unwavering. "And we're not done. We will continue to push the envelope. And we will not be stopped. This is more than a company. This is a mission. And that mission is bigger than any of us." The room erupted into applause. The journalists who had once been skeptical were now asking questions, eager to learn more about what Tesla would do next. Investors looked at one another, some nodding in approval, others still uncertain. But there was one thing Elon knew for sure: they had his attention. As the press conference wound down, Elon left the stage, feeling the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. He had just made the boldest statement of his career, and he knew there was no turning back. The world would either rise to meet him, or fall behind. But this was just the beginning. Elon Musk was about to take Tesla and SpaceX to the next level. The critics might have doubted him, but now, they had no choice but to watch. In the days that followed, the media coverage was intense. Some outlets praised him for his bold vision, while others remained critical, questioning whether Tesla could live up to its promises. But the most significant change came from within Tesla itself. The employees, who had felt the growing tension of the past few weeks, now felt reinvigorated. The message was clear: they were part of something bigger than just a company, they were part of a movement. And that movement was unstoppable. As Elon sat back in his office, reading the news coverage and reflecting on the press conference, he realized something important: the fight was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. There would be obstacles. There would be challenges. But Elon had never been one to back down. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The journey had just begun. The aftermath of Elon's bold press conference reverberated through the media, across social networks, and into every boardroom that had been following Tesla's every move. The initial wave of excitement had quickly faded into skepticism. The stock had bounced slightly, but the backlash was intense, and the media wasn't letting up. Elon had expected criticism, he always did, but something about the intensity of this particular wave of discontent felt different. It wasn't just the typical doubters anymore, it was everyone. Wall Street analysts were dissecting his every word, trying to understand whether Tesla could continue its rapid growth, whether it could live up to its promises. Sitting in his office late one evening, Elon stared out the window at the darkening sky, the city lights flickering beneath him. A storm was on the horizon. The thought didn't bring him peace, as it usually did when he prepared for a new challenge. This time, the storm felt closer, more personal, and he couldn't ignore it. His phone buzzed, cutting through the silence. He picked it up and saw that it was a message from Gwyn. Gwyn Shotwell, Elon, I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Can you meet? His heart sank, and without hesitation, he dialed her number. Gwyn, he said the moment she picked up, what's going on? I think we need to talk about the direction we're heading, Gwyn replied, her voice strained. The board is seriously concerned. They're not just worried about the financial side of things anymore. They're concerned about your leadership, Elon. Some of them are questioning if you're really in touch with the company's core mission. Elon's grip tightened around the phone. What are you saying? That they think I've lost my way? It's not like that, Gwyn said, her tone softening. But there's pressure from all sides. The investors want faster growth, and the market is becoming more competitive. There's also this growing concern about your approach. You've always been unconventional, but now, it feels like we're at a tipping point. Some of them are worried that your focus on the future might cost us the present. Elon stood up and paced around his office, trying to calm the storm inside himself. You know how much this means, Gwyn. I can't just focus on the short term. I'm doing this for the future, our future. I won't let anyone stand in the way of that. Gwyn sighed. I know, but they're afraid the future might never come if we can't stay afloat long enough to get there. You need to understand that this is about balance, not just vision. We need to prove we can deliver, now. Before everything unravels. Elon was silent for a long moment. The weight of the conversation hit him harder than he expected. He had always been the visionary, the one who saw beyond the horizon, but now it felt like the very vision he had built was slipping through his fingers. The meeting with the board was scheduled for the following morning, and Elon knew it wasn't going to be easy. But even as doubts crept into his mind, he knew one thing for certain, he couldn't back down. He had to make them believe in his vision. He had to prove that the future he saw was real, and that it was worth the sacrifices. The next day, he walked into the boardroom, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. The room was tense, a mix of seasoned investors and key executives, all waiting for him to explain himself. He took his seat at the head of the table, his fingers steepled in front of him. For a brief moment, the silence felt suffocating. Let's get to the point, Elon said, his voice calm but firm. I know there's been a lot of concern, and I understand why. We've hit a rough patch, but that's nothing new. We've faced challenges before, and we've always come out on top. One of the investors, a man named Richard Mallory, leaned forward. Elon, this isn't just about hitting a rough patch. We're talking about the future of Tesla. We need to know that you're still leading us with a clear and realistic plan. People are starting to doubt whether your long-term vision is actually achievable. Your public statements have only made things worse. You're being seen as disconnected. Elon's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The very thing he had feared, the sense that his vision was starting to fracture, not just in the public eye, but within the company itself. I am not disconnected, Elon said, his voice sharper now. What we're doing here at Tesla is revolutionary. We are not just making electric cars. We are redefining the future of energy, transportation, and beyond. You don't make progress by playing it safe. Another board member, Linda Clark, interjected. We understand the vision, Elon. But at some point, you have to deliver results. We can't keep making excuses for why things aren't moving fast enough. Our investors are getting restless. Elon's pulse raced as the weight of their words sunk in. The room was closing in on him. It was the same message he had heard before, but it felt different this time. These weren't just outside critics, these were the people who had supported him, the ones who had believed in him and his vision. "I don't have time for short-term thinking," Elon said, trying to steady his emotions. "We're not here to be a business that simply makes money. We're here to change the world. And if we have to endure some temporary setbacks, then so be it. The only way to truly innovate is to take risks. And we're in this for the long haul." There was a long, uncomfortable silence before Richard Mallory spoke again. "Elon, we don't want to stop you. We're just asking for a little more realism. We need you to balance your passion with the practicalities of running a company. If you can't do that, we'll have no choice but to reconsider who's at the helm." The words hit him like a punch in the stomach. The threat of losing control, of losing everything he had worked for, hung heavy in the air. Elon's mind raced. This was it. This was the moment that would define his future, and he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. The world was watching, waiting for him to fail, and it felt as if the pressure was suffocating him. In that moment, something snapped inside of him. "No," he said, his voice low but filled with intensity. "I will not be the person who compromises my vision for the sake of short-term comfort. If that's what you want, then maybe it's time we part ways. I am not here to be a CEO who plays it safe. I'm here to change the world. And if you can't see that, then maybe I'm not the leader you need." He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and with that, he walked out of the room, leaving the board stunned in his wake. Elon stepped out of the boardroom with a sense of finality, the door swinging shut behind him with a loud thud. The tension that had been building for weeks seemed to settle into a heavy, suffocating stillness. He had made his decision, but the weight of that decision bore down on him more than he had expected. His heart pounded, his thoughts racing. The confrontation with the board had been inevitable, he knew that. But as he walked down the sterile hallways of Tesla's headquarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had irrevocably shifted. This was no longer about just the company, or even about his vision. It was about him. It was about who he was, what he believed in, and how far he was willing to go to protect that. Gwyn was waiting for him outside the boardroom, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything at first, just gave him a brief nod as they both walked toward the elevators. "How did it go?" she asked finally, her voice calm but tinged with concern. Elon rubbed his forehead, trying to find the right words. "It's over," he said. "They don't believe in the vision anymore. They think I'm too focused on the future and not enough on the present. I told them they either support the mission, or they don't." Gwyn sighed, her face a mixture of frustration and sympathy. "Elon, you can't be this stubborn. There has to be a middle ground. We can't just bulldoze over everything. They're worried about the company's future. You can't expect them to just take everything on faith." Elon turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a mix of determination and exhaustion. "I'm not asking them to take it on faith. I'm telling them that what we're doing here is bigger than just numbers and profits. I've sacrificed everything for this. My time, my energy, my relationships. I'm not going to back down now." Gwyn was silent for a moment, then spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I understand, Elon. I do. But sometimes, the mission doesn't just require vision. It requires the people around you to believe in it too. And if you push too hard, you might lose the ones who matter most." Elon felt a pang of guilt at her words. He had been so focused on his mission, so certain that he was right, that he hadn't stopped to consider how his decisions were affecting those closest to him. Gwyn had been with him from the beginning, supporting him through every crazy idea and every impossible project. She was more than just a business partner, she was his confidant. And right now, he could see the worry in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice laced with weariness. I can't let them derail this. We're so close, Gwyn. I can feel it. We're going to change the world. I won't let anyone stop that." "I know you believe that," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "But sometimes, you have to ask yourself if it's worth losing everything to prove you're right." Elon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood in silence as the elevator descended, his thoughts swirling. He knew Gwyn was right. There had to be a balance between his ambition and the reality of running a company. But it was hard for him to reconcile that. His mind was always racing forward, always thinking of what was next. As the elevator doors opened, Elon stepped out into the main floor of Tesla's headquarters. The space was bustling with activity as employees went about their work, unaware of the storm that had just hit their company's leadership. He walked past them, but the usual sense of purpose he felt in the air seemed distant now. When he reached his office, he sat down heavily in his chair. The weight of the conversation with the board had settled in. Could he really continue pushing forward, no matter the cost? Or was there a way to change his approach, without abandoning the vision he had worked so tirelessly to build? He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to clear his mind. There was a part of him that knew he was right, that his vision was worth the sacrifice. But there was another part of him, a quieter, more rational voice, that wondered if the cost had already become too high. Suddenly, his phone rang, breaking the silence. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello?" Elon answered, his voice still heavy with the thoughts that had been consuming him all day. "Elon." The voice on the other end was unmistakable, though it was softer than usual. "It's Musk. Your father." Elon felt a jolt of surprise. It had been months since he last heard from his father, Elon Musk, and the relationship between them was strained, to say the least. "What do you want?" Elon replied, his voice colder than he intended. "I've been keeping track of what's going on," Errol said. "And I've got to say, I don't know if this is the right path for you anymore. You're fighting too hard, and it's eating you alive. You've always been determined, but you're not invincible, Elon. Don't make the same mistakes I did." Elon's jaw tightened. "I'm not you," he said through gritted teeth. "I'm doing this because it's what the world needs. Not for myself. But for humanity." "I know," Errol replied, a rare note of vulnerability in his voice. "But sometimes, you've got to ask yourself if the price is too high. I've lost everything chasing after my own dreams. Don't make the same mistake." The line went silent for a moment. Elon's mind raced, his father's words sinking in, echoing the thoughts he had been trying to ignore. Was it worth it? Was it worth the personal cost, the toll it was taking on him and his relationships? "I have to go," Elon said, cutting the conversation short. "I'm not giving up. Not now. Not ever." He hung up the phone, but the weight of the conversation lingered. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long while, the clarity he had always relied on seemed distant. The vision had always been clear, but now, the path ahead seemed shrouded in doubt. What was he willing to sacrifice to achieve the impossible? The days after Elon's confrontation with the board were filled with a haunting quiet. The usual hum of activity at Tesla's headquarters seemed subdued, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the storm to pass. But the storm wasn't over, it was only just beginning. Elon sat in his office, the blinds drawn tight, his eyes fixed on the empty space in front of him. The future that had once seemed so clear now felt blurred, obscured by the weight of decisions he couldn't reverse. The messages from investors, the calls from media outlets, the text threads with Gwyn, everything had become a blur of noise. And in the midst of it all, a gnawing question kept resurfacing: was he still in control? His mind kept returning to the conversation with his father. Errol's words had struck a chord deep within him. He had spent so many years trying to escape his father's shadow, trying to prove that he was different, that he wouldn't make the same mistakes. But now, as he sat in the quiet of his office, he couldn't help but wonder if he had already fallen into the same trap. Was he so consumed by his dream of changing the world that he was losing sight of everything else? A knock on the door broke him from his thoughts. He straightened up, wiped his face with his hand, and said, "Come in." It was Gwyn. Her face was drawn, but she looked determined. She walked in, closing the door softly behind her. "Elon," she started, her voice calm but laced with concern, "I've been talking to the board. They're not backing down. They want answers, and they want them now." Elon didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if searching for an answer that wasn't there. "They think I'm losing touch," he muttered finally. "And maybe they're right." Gwyn's eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean by that?" "I've been so focused on the future," Elon said, rubbing his temples. "So focused on what's next that I haven't been paying attention to the present. The people around me, the company, the mission itself. I've been losing sight of everything that matters. I don't know how to fix it." Gwyn's face softened, and she moved to sit across from him. "Elon, we're all in this together. No one is expecting perfection from you, but you have to ask yourself if the way you've been going about things is working. There's a balance between being a visionary and being a leader. Right now, it feels like you're leaning too heavily into one side." Elon looked at her, frustration building. "I'm not backing down, Gwyn. Not now, not ever. The vision is too important." "I know that," she replied. "But it doesn't have to come at the cost of everything else. You've built something incredible here, but you can't lose the people who helped you build it. Not for the sake of proving a point." For a long moment, Elon didn't speak. The weight of her words sank in, and a bitter truth began to surface in his mind. His obsession with the future, his desire to be the one who changed everything, had blinded him to the present. He had alienated people, made decisions that felt disconnected from the reality of running a business. And now, he was facing the consequences. "Elon," Gwyn said, breaking his reverie, "the board isn't just questioning your leadership. They're questioning whether they can continue supporting you if you don't start showing results. They're concerned about the future of Tesla." Elon stood abruptly, pacing the room. "I know what they're worried about. But they don't see what I see. They don't understand how close we are to something revolutionary." Gwyn followed him with her eyes, then said, "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you've been too focused on the revolution and not enough on what needs to be done to get there." Elon stopped pacing, his mind churning with the realization. Was she right? Had he been so focused on his grand vision that he had lost sight of the reality in front of him? Maybe he had pushed too hard, too fast, without considering the balance that Gwyn was talking about. The silence in the room felt thick, as if the weight of their conversation had reached a tipping point. Finally, Elon spoke, his voice softer than usual. "I don't know what to do, Gwyn. I've spent my entire life chasing this dream. But I feel like I'm on the edge of losing everything because I can't get people to see it the way I do." Gwyn stood up, walking over to him. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch steady and reassuring. "You've never had to do this alone, Elon. You don't have to now." The words settled in the space between them, and for a moment, Elon felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps it wasn't too late to change the course he had set. Maybe it wasn't about abandoning the dream, but about finding a way to make it work without losing everything along the way. "I need a plan," Elon said, finally turning to face her. "A real plan. One that not only pushes us forward, but keeps everything we've built intact." Gwyn nodded. "We'll figure it out together. But you can't do this on your own. You need to listen to the people around you, the ones who have been with you through the toughest moments." "I'll try," Elon said, his voice a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. Gwyn gave him a small smile, a sign of encouragement. "We'll get through this, Elon. You just have to trust the process." Trust the people who believe in you. As the day wore on, Elon found himself lost in thought. The conversations with Gwyn, with the board, and even with his father had left him questioning everything he thought he knew. The stakes were higher than ever. Tesla wasn't just a company, it was his legacy. The future he had dreamed of was within reach, but it felt like everything was slipping away. The tension between pushing forward and holding on to what he had built weighed heavily on his mind as he began to map out his next move. The path forward was unclear, and the stakes had never been higher. But in the quiet of his office, amidst the chaos that surrounded him, one thing was certain: he wasn't going to give up. Not yet. The future was still out there. And he was going to find a way to make it real. Elon sat alone in the dim light of his office late into the night, staring at the glowing screen in front of him. The numbers, the projections, the graphs, they all blurred together. It felt like his entire life had been leading to this one moment, and yet, he wasn't sure if he was winning or losing. The board had made their final demand. They wanted proof that Tesla was on track, that the grand vision was sustainable, and that it could deliver tangible results. And not just any results, results that would silence the doubters, the critics, and most importantly, the ones who were questioning his leadership. He had heard the rumors, whispers of his possible resignation. Doubts about his ability to steer Tesla through the turbulence. But Elon refused to let go, not when he had come this far. His mind wandered back to the decision he had made months ago, the decision that had cost him the most. The decision to double down on his goals, to push beyond the limits of what anyone thought was possible. Tesla's mission wasn't just about electric cars anymore, it was about altering the very fabric of the future. Colonizing Mars, creating sustainable energy for all, revolutionizing transportation, all of it hinged on Tesla's success. But now, with the weight of the board's demands pressing down on him, the scale of the task seemed overwhelming. His ambition had been his greatest asset, but it was also becoming his greatest enemy. Every choice he made felt like a step further into the unknown. Elon stood up, pacing the room as his thoughts churned. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, reminding him that time was running out. His phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his reverie. He glanced at it, then sighed as he saw who it was. Gwyn. He had been avoiding her calls all day. He didn't know what to say anymore. Could he really fix this? Could he truly pull Tesla out of the nosedive it seemed to be in? He picked up the phone. Elon, Gwyn's voice came through, steady but with an undercurrent of concern. We need to talk. I know, he said, running a hand through his hair. I'm not sure what to do anymore. You can't keep avoiding the reality of the situation, she replied. The board's been pushing us for weeks. They want results, and they want them now. And frankly, so do investors. You're under more pressure than you've ever been, but you're not the only one carrying that weight. He felt the sting of her words, but she was right. He wasn't alone in this. Tesla wasn't just his company, it was built by the efforts of a lot of people who had invested their time, their careers, and their belief in him. You're right, he said quietly. I've been so focused on proving a point, on trying to make everything work according to my vision, that I've lost sight of the bigger picture. Tesla is bigger than me. And if I don't find a way to make this work, it's not just my dream I'm throwing away. Gwyn's voice softened. You've built something incredible, Elon. But right now, it's not about proving anything to the world. It's about stabilizing Tesla. The team, the investors, the board, they need to see that the company can move forward with confidence. You need to show them that. Elon took a deep breath. He had always been about innovation, about pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But now, the time had come for him to prove that he could lead, not just dream. All right, he said finally. I'll do it. I'll meet with the board, but this time, I'm not just going to talk about the future. I'm going to show them that the future is already here. Gwyn was quiet for a moment. I'll be with you, every step of the way. As the call ended, Elon felt a rush of determination flood through him. It was time to face the reckoning, the moment where everything he had worked for would either fall apart or fall into place. The clock was ticking, and there was no more time for hesitation. The next day, Elon stood before the board, his usual confidence replaced by a sense of quiet determination. The room was packed with the company's key executives, financial backers, and a few of the investors who had been vocal about their concerns. They were all there, waiting for him to deliver. For a moment, Elon felt the weight of their gazes. These were the people who had helped him build this empire, but today, they were also the ones questioning whether or not he was the right person to lead it. "I know I've let you down," Elon started, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of sincerity. "I've been so focused on the future, on the big vision, that I've lost sight of the present. Tesla is not just about dreams of Mars or creating a new world. It's about today, about making sure we're here for the long run. I've realized that, and I'm here to show you that I can lead us there." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. The board members shifted in their seats, some nodding, others still skeptical. But Elon wasn't going to let doubt derail him. "I've been working with the team to put together a plan," he continued. "We have the product, the technology, and the potential. What we need now is focus, execution, and confidence. I'm not asking for a second chance, I'm asking for the opportunity to show you that Tesla is on the right track." He laid out his vision for the next 6 months, cost reduction strategies, scaling production, and more immediate goals that would give the company the financial stability it needed while also staying true to the long-term mission of sustainability. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but the work had already begun. And then, he paused, meeting each board member's gaze. "This is the reality. We need to stabilize now, or risk losing everything we've worked for. But I'm ready to do what it takes. I've always been ready." The room fell into silence, and for a moment, Elon wasn't sure what they were thinking. Then, one by one, the board members began to nod. "We're on board," one of them said, breaking the silence. "We trust you, Elon. But you need to deliver. No more setbacks. No more distractions." Elon nodded, feeling a surge of relief, but also an immense pressure. The battle wasn't over yet. The stakes had never been higher, and every move from here on out would determine Tesla's future. As Elon walked out of the boardroom, a sense of calm washed over him. It wasn't a victory, at least, not yet. But it was a beginning. A new chapter in a story that had seemed destined to unravel. And now, with the support of his team and the commitment to stay the course, the next challenge lay ahead. The reckoning had arrived, and Elon Musk was ready to face it head-on. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, conference calls, and boardroom meetings. Elon had managed to win the board's approval, but the weight of their trust pressed heavily on his shoulders. Tesla was at a critical juncture, one wrong move, and the entire company could falter. His vision had always been revolutionary, but now it had to be practical, sustainable, and, above all, profitable. Elon sat in his office one morning, staring at the latest reports from the factory. The numbers weren't terrible, but they weren't great either. Production was behind schedule, and there were still significant bottlenecks in the supply chain. Yet, amidst the chaos, a small glimmer of hope had begun to emerge. His recent decisions to streamline operations and prioritize innovation over expansion were starting to show signs of progress. But there was something more important than the numbers, something that had been haunting him for months, the question of whether he could actually change the world or whether his vision was doomed to fail. Every decision felt like it could be the tipping point. Would he be remembered as the genius who led Tesla to greatness, or the man who watched it all slip away? As he sat in contemplation, the door to his office opened. Gwyn entered, looking as determined as ever. There was no time for small talk today, they both knew the stakes were too high. "Elon," she began, walking towards him. "We've got some good news." He raised an eyebrow, skeptical but curious. "Good news? We're finally seeing a shift in production. The new supply chain strategy is paying off faster than expected. We're ahead of schedule on the Model Y ramp-up, and our cost per unit is coming down. Elon leaned back in his chair, processing the information. It wasn't the full victory he had hoped for, but it was a start. A sign that all the hard work and sleepless nights were beginning to pay off. "That's great," he said, his voice still weighed down with the pressure of the larger task at hand. "But is it enough? Can we really scale this fast enough to meet demand?" Gwyn smiled, a rare moment of optimism in her otherwise serious demeanor. "It's a start, Elon. But yes, it's enough to keep us moving forward. We're not just surviving anymore, we're thriving. The team is pulling together, and you're leading us in the right direction." Her words were a lifeline, a much-needed reminder of why he had started this journey in the first place. For so long, Elon had been lost in the chaos, convinced that the only path forward was one of extreme innovation and risk. But perhaps the answer wasn't just about pushing further, it was about finding balance, about trusting in the team around him, and learning to adapt. "I've been thinking," Elon said, his voice softer than usual. "About what you said, the balance between vision and leadership. Maybe I've been too focused on proving a point, and not enough on guiding the ship. I've always pushed for more, but I think it's time I learned to be more strategic. I'm not just building a company, I'm building a legacy. I have to make sure that legacy endures." Gwyn nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Exactly. You've got a rare gift, Elon. But it's not just about how far you can go, it's about how far you can take everyone with you." For a moment, there was a silence between them. Both of them knew that the journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time in months, Elon felt a sense of clarity. The pressure was still there, but the fear of failure had diminished. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't about to waste it. "I want to do something for the team," Elon said suddenly, the idea forming in his mind. "A celebration. They've been through hell and back with me. If we're going to succeed, it's because they've been with me every step of the way. They deserve to know that I see them, that I appreciate them." Gwyn smiled again, this time with a hint of approval. "That's the Elon I know. Let's make it happen." The next week, Tesla's headquarters was buzzing with excitement. The entire company had been invited to a celebration, an event that was long overdue. Elon stood at the front of the room, looking out over the crowd. Employees from every department, engineers, designers, factory workers, filled the space. They had all come together to celebrate what they had achieved, but also to look forward to what was next. Elon raised his glass. "This isn't just about the cars we've built or the innovations we've achieved," he began, his voice steady and clear. "This is about each and every one of you. You've all given everything to this mission, and we've come through stronger because of it. We are no longer just a company, we are a movement. And this is only the beginning." The room erupted in applause, but for Elon, it wasn't just the applause that mattered, it was the sense of unity in the air. For the first time in a long while, he felt connected to the people around him. They weren't just following his lead, they were walking alongside him, working toward a shared goal. As the evening wore on, Elon found himself in a quiet corner of the room, reflecting on everything he had been through. The ups, the downs, the struggles, and the triumphs, it had all led him here, to this moment of clarity. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear, he wasn't alone in this fight anymore. He had the support of his team, and together, they were unstoppable. It was a moment of reckoning, a moment of understanding. The weight he had carried for so long was lifting, replaced by the realization that the future wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who believed in the mission. Later that night, as Elon stood on the balcony of his home, gazing out over the city, he allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The battle wasn't over. There were still countless challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The phoenix wasn't just rising, it had already spread its wings. And Elon Musk, for all his flaws and failures, had rediscovered what truly mattered. The vision was still there, but now, he was ready to lead it into the future with purpose, with focus, and with the knowledge that he didn't have to do it alone. The future was in his hands, and with the support of his team, nothing could stop him. The sun was setting over Silicon Valley, casting a golden hue across the sprawling Tesla campus. Elon Musk stood at the front of a vast auditorium, the hum of conversation slowly quieting as employees, investors, and media members gathered for one of the most important events in Tesla's history. Today wasn't just another product launch or quarterly earnings announcement. Today, it was about something far bigger, something that would define the company for generations to come. It had been over a year since the chaotic battles, the court hearings, and the mounting pressure from all sides. Yet here he stood, more focused than ever, no longer just a visionary chasing the impossible, but a leader who had learned to balance ambition with reality. Tesla was on the brink of something truly remarkable. Sustainable energy and revolutionary transportation had become more than just goals, they were within reach. The last year had been a whirlwind. Elon had faced accusations of being a reckless CEO, a dreamer too out of touch with the present. The press had criticized him, investors had doubted him, and even some of his closest colleagues had wondered if his grand ideas were ultimately too much to handle. But through all of that, something had changed in Elon, something that couldn't be denied anymore. He wasn't just trying to build a company anymore, he was building a legacy. A legacy that would change the world for good. As he walked to the podium, he felt the eyes of the room on him, waiting, expecting. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel nervous. He was ready. "Good afternoon, everyone," Elon began, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "A few years ago, when we started this journey, Tesla was nothing more than an idea. We were a company that was going to revolutionize the way people thought about cars, about energy, about the future itself. But as with every journey worth taking, it hasn't been easy. We've faced challenges, setbacks, and moments where it seemed like the dream might slip away. But here we are today, not just surviving, but thriving." There was a pause, and a ripple of applause spread through the room. But Elon wasn't done. "We've faced a lot of criticism over the years. Some of it deserved, some of it not. We've made mistakes. But every mistake we've made has taught us something vital. We've learned how to innovate, how to push the boundaries of what's possible, but also how to be practical, how to build for the long term. And we've learned something even more important, we've learned that success doesn't come from doing it alone." He paused again, allowing the words to resonate. The faces in the crowd were filled with anticipation. This was a man who had weathered storms, faced insurmountable odds, and was now at the precipice of something extraordinary. "I've spent years dreaming of a world where sustainable energy is not just a vision but a reality. A world where we don't have to choose between progress and the planet. A world where innovation drives us forward, but it also improves our quality of life. And I'm proud to say that we're getting closer to that world every single day." The room was silent, hanging on his every word. Elon's voice softened as he continued. "But we're not stopping here. Today, I'm announcing that Tesla will be taking the next major step in its mission. We're going to expand our energy solutions, solar, storage, and grid services, beyond what anyone thought possible. Our next big venture is going to be not just about electric vehicles, but about creating a world where every home, every business, every person has access to clean, renewable energy, no matter where they are." The crowd exploded into applause. The excitement was palpable. Elon smiled faintly, his gaze briefly drifting over the sea of people. His mind was racing, thinking about the journey ahead, but for a moment, he allowed himself to savor this moment of triumph. "And," he added, "this isn't just about Tesla anymore. It's about every company, every person who believes in the power of innovation. We're going to change the way the world thinks about energy and transportation. We're going to show that sustainability and progress are not opposites, they are one and the same." As he concluded his speech, Elon stood still for a moment, allowing the applause to wash over him. He had come a long way since the early days of Tesla. The path had been fraught with failure, doubt, and pain, but he had persevered. He had learned, adapted, and evolved. And in the process, he had created something that mattered. After the presentation, Elon lingered backstage, reflecting on what had just transpired. His heart still raced from the excitement of the announcement, but his mind was already shifting to the next challenge. The company was no longer on the edge of disaster, it was on the verge of greatness. But greatness, as he had learned, was not a destination. It was a continuous journey. Gwyn approached him, a smile on her face. "You did it," she said, her voice warm. "You finally brought everyone together." Elon smiled back, though it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of quiet satisfaction. "It's not just me," he replied. "It's the team. We've all made this happen." Gwyn nodded. "And the road ahead will be just as challenging as the one behind. But you've shown everyone that we can make it. You've built something real, Elon." He gazed out at the Tesla campus, a sense of peace settling over him. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, he felt ready. There would be more battles, more challenges, and more critics to silence. But he had the tools now, the clarity, the focus, and the support of a team that believed in the vision. "Maybe we've built more than just a company," Elon mused quietly. "Maybe we've built a movement." As the sun set behind him, casting its golden light over the Tesla campus, Elon felt a sense of completion. He had faced the reckoning, the doubts, and the setbacks. He had weathered the storm. And now, at long last, it was clear, Tesla was more than a company, it was a legacy. And Elon Musk, for all his flaws and brilliance, had proven that dreams, no matter how ambitious, could change the world. Elon Musk has built more than just a company, he's built a movement that will shape the future for generations to come. As Tesla embarks on its next chapter, what does the future hold for the electric car industry? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for the latest updates. The journey is far from over. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?